Hey guys, welcome back into our Docker certification series. In the last episode, we quickly talked about some of the fundamental concepts around the Docker engine, the Docker client, Docker registry, and some of the other things like a VM and container. In this episode, we'll go ahead and take a look at the hands-on. How do we go ahead and install or prepare a Docker host? So for our training, for our learning, we will be using an all-in-one install. When I say all-in-one, we will have the Docker server as well as the Docker client running on the same host. So we will not be having multiple client and server in the beginning of this series. Later on, I will show you how you can connect a client to a running server. In today's episode, we'll go ahead and take a look at and see how we can go ahead and install a Docker on one of our hosts and convert that host into a Docker host. As I'm sharing the documentation, the official documentation with you on the docs.docker.com. So the host, the version, I have went ahead and installed a host machine. And the host machine that I'm using in this case, it's an Ubuntu. I went ahead and picked up 16.04. That was the version I had downloaded earlier. So I went ahead and created a VM based on the Ubuntu 16.04. So we will be using this host for the installation for our Docker. So there are multiple ways you can go ahead and install Docker. And if you recall, in the last episode, we also talked about the different types or the different editions of the Docker engine. In this episode, or for our demo or for our training, we talked earlier, we will be using the Docker engine for the community edition. And because the OS, in this case, I'm using in Ubuntu, so we will be following the installation instructions for the Ubuntu. If you go through this official documentation, it really talks about there are multiple ways using that you can go ahead and install a Docker onto a machine. So if you take a look at here, to install Docker Enterprise Edition, we can go here and take a look at it. It talks about these are the different OS to install Docker Engine Community. We need a 64-bit version of the Ubuntu version. And minimum they support is 16.04 LTS, and that's what we will be using for our case, which is 16.04 LTS. Now there are many ways. It says, okay, hey, if you are running an old version, you can go ahead and install that version. And then later on, you can go ahead and install a new version. So if you scroll here further, it says Docker Engine for Community. So if you take a look at this Docker Engine for Community, it really says you can install Docker Engine Community in different ways depending on your needs. The easiest way, you can go ahead and make use of the repository. If you are familiar with the apt-get command, you can go ahead and update your box. You can go ahead and add the repository, and using the repository, you can go ahead and add the GPG key, and then later on, you can go ahead and do the installation. Once that is done, you are up and running. So there are many ways using that you can go ahead and install, but I find this version to be the way to install using this convenience script. I think if you are doing the Docker installation very first time, I would strongly suggest you to go ahead and make use of this. There are a couple benefits or advantage that you get using this convenience script. So it clearly says here, Docker provide convenience script at get.docker.com. So we can go to this URL and download the script for installing Edge. So in this case, we will be downloading the Edge version for our learning purpose. So Docker Engine Community into development. So it goes through the couple version. So the good thing about using these scripts is not recommended for production environment. It's meant for only for testing and learning. Go ahead and make use of that. There are few things that script expects you. Script expects you that you are running this script using a root or a sudo privilege. And there are a couple of ways. And if you scroll on the same page, here it clearly says, okay, hey, always examine script downloaded. So the way we will go ahead and download the script, the script name is get-docker.sh. And we will be downloading this sh script from get.docker.com with the help of the curl command. And once that is done, we'll go ahead and examine the script before we go ahead and execute. So just let's simply copy this line. And before we do that, make sure after the installation of your host machine, it is updated. So let's go ahead and just simply run apt-get update. And I'm not providing sudo because right now I'm in the root. So I can go ahead and simply run apt-get update. So let's go ahead and see if there is any package, anything needs to be updated. But looks like in our case, all is set. And if I do ls right now here, looks like I had the previous version of the script. So I'll go ahead and delete the previous version of the script. And as you can see, we don't have a previous version of script anymore. So now let's just simply go ahead and copy this line. And now we can go ahead and paste this line onto our host. So this curl command will go ahead and download this script from this URL. So let's go ahead and download the script. And as you can see, we are back at prompt. So if I go ahead and take a look at here, the script is downloaded. So let's quickly examine the script. What are the content of the script before we really go ahead and execute? So I'll go ahead and do a VI using the VI editor. And it clearly says, okay, hey, this script is meant for quick and easy install via whatever the instructions we were reading on the page. For test builds, we can go ahead and download from the script is different. The name of the script is test-docker.sh. And then it kind of really talks about some of the different things. Okay, from where it's going to download some of the things, it's going to add some repo and some of the other things. So there is one thing that I want you to remember. If you are sitting behind some kind of an netted environment where if you cannot go outside, you might need to set a proxy or something. So in my case, this one of my VM is within a proxy environment. So I'll go ahead and within this script, I'll go ahead and add the details about my HTTP and HTTPS proxy before we go ahead and run the script. So I'll just simply go ahead and say export HTTP_proxy, and I'll go ahead and the name of my proxy is my proxy. It's running on port 80. I'll go ahead and do the same thing for HTTPS. So I'll go ahead and say HTTP : my proxy : port 80. Again, if you are not in a proxy environment, you don't have to do that. But I feel the script and adding this kind of really helps if you are behind some kind of a proxy environment. And again, you can go ahead and read the whole script, line by line and see what this script is really doing. So now we just simply go ahead and save the script. Now, if you go back and refer to our documentation, the script really calls out, okay, hey, now go ahead and run this download script with the help of the sudo sh. Again, we are running as root, so we don't have to use the sudo. We just simply go ahead and say sh get-docker.sh. So now I'll just simply go ahead and execute the script. And now if you see, the system has started executing the script where it says executing docker install script. There's some of the commit. And if you can see, it's doing an apt-get update. Part of the process, it's trying to do an apt-get install. It's adding some of the repos, some certificates. And you can see here it's doing some curl. It's downloading some of the GPG keys, adding some of the repo. As you can see, this is the repo being added to the SC app sources.list.d/docker.list. And right now we are doing an apt-get update. And you can see here the version that is being installed is docker-ce. So this will take a couple minutes. So once the install is done, we will be able to examine some of the other things around the Docker. Okay, and as you can see, that was pretty quick. So the install was done, and you can see here part of this install also ran a command by name docker version. So you can see here clearly client. So this machine is running a client, and the Docker engine for community, the version of our client that we are using is 1903.2. You can see some of the thing, and this version was built on August 29th, 2019. So it looks like that was the latest build that was out there. And as you can see, within the same, you can see here it shows you the server version. So server Docker engine for community again. We are using the community edition. The version that is being used is 1903.2. The API version, you can take a look at here if you remember. The Docker server, and on top of that we have the API layer. So the API version here, it says 1.40. And these are some of the things it talks about. The one of the very important things that I think we need to pay attention is this particular block, where it says if you would like to use Docker as a non-root user. Because right now if you see, we are executing all the commands as a root user. So this is becomes very important. We don't want to run a Docker, or we don't want to create our container every time from the root context or from the root user. So that's why the Docker gives you an option, says, hey, if you would like to use a Docker as a non-root user, which we want to, you should now consider adding user to the Docker group with something like this. So it is giving you an option saying, okay, hey, you can go ahead and add your user to the Docker group. So we'll go ahead and say user mod. We are modifying a user. We are assigning it to a group, and the name of the group is Docker, and we'll go ahead and provide our username. So let me go ahead and execute this command. And the name of my user is my name, ARUN. So I'll go ahead and do that. So now once that is done, now it clearly says, okay, adding a user to the Docker group will grant the ability to run containers, which can be used to obtain root privileges on the Docker host. We are okay with that. So now let's, for these changes to take effect, when I say this changes, what do I mean by that? Because we just added this user to this group. Before this user can really start making use of the Docker commands, we need to exit the shell once, and then we need to re-log in for it to start working again. So let me go ahead and exit out the session, re-log in one more time. And as you can see, we have logged on back to the host. Okay, I don't have to do as a sudo. Now, if the previous command where we went ahead and added this user to that group, if everything is okay, now this user should have the ability to execute the Docker commands. And when I say execute the commands, that means we will be using the Docker commands, which is the Docker client, to talk to the Docker server, Docker daemon, which is also running on the same host. So just to verify that, we can go ahead and run some of the useful easy command. So we can say Docker, and if you do a tab after Docker, you would see a couple things. And if you recall, in the previous episode, we had talked about there is a Docker D, which is your Docker server. And this Docker is the Docker client. So the Docker client will be talking to the Docker D, which is a Docker daemon or Docker server. And Docker D or the Docker server is the one who's doing all the heavy lifting for us. So now let's go ahead and verify a few other things. So we are just running a version command that tells us, okay, hey, the version of the Docker on this machine is 1903.2. If we want to get some more information, we can go ahead and simply execute a command that says Docker version. And if you type a Docker version without hyphen, you get a little bit more detail that we saw during the installation, where it kind of shows, okay, hey, the client version, more detail about the client, and some of the more details about the definitely Docker server. There is another very cool important command that you can go ahead and run, and I think it's a pretty handy command that you should remember always, which is called Docker info. So if you go ahead and Docker info kind of spits out a lot of information. Let's try to understand what are some of the things it says. So it says, okay, hey, your client debug, is your client running the debug mode? It says no, the client is not running the debug mode. What are the server? Are there any containers? Right now there are no containers. There are no containers which are running. There are no containers which are in stop state. There are no containers which are in the pause state. There are no images as of right now on this machine. The storage driver this Docker is using right now is overlay 2. This is something we'll discuss as we later on move further. The backing file system that is being utilized is right now the extfs. And if you recall, the system is using the C group, which is your C groups here. Volumes are pretty much local. The network that are being right now used are bridge, host, IP-WAN, MAC VLAN, null, and overlay. And it talks about some of the other things. Another thing that you can go ahead and take a look at here, it says, okay, the version of your machine is this. And the total amount of memory available on this box is close to 63 gig. Number of CPUs available on this host is 32. The name of this host is host 1. And the Docker root directory is warlib docker. That's where you can, when you start creating containers or images, this is the place it's going to go ahead and start storing that. And take a look here where it says registry. And right now the registry says index.docker.io.v1. So if you recall, in the previous episode, we had talked about the Docker registry. When you install a Docker, it points to a default, which is a public repository. And that's where you can see what repo your Docker is currently being configured to. So these are some of the things that you can go ahead and take a look, and you can go ahead and start working with the Docker. Again, this video is all about how do you really go ahead and install a Docker onto a host and then execute some of the very basic commands to make sure your Docker is working before we really go ahead and deep dive into some of the other concepts. So that'll be all for this particular video. Again, you can go to docs.docker.com to go ahead and take a look at and read some of these things in more detail. I will see you all guys in the next episode. Thank you very much.